Good morning, everyone, and welcome back once again to this course in Fundamental Principles of Bioethics, Catholic Bioethics, in the program of Bioethics, Master of Bioethics at St. Thomas University. Today we're going to review variation and go further into selection. So we begin as always in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Blessed Trinity, we love you, we adore you, and we thank you for all your many blessings, for the gift of life, and for having us here today, especially on this day, on the commemoration of All Souls. We remember our faithful departed, all the souls in purgatory, that according to your divine will and your mercy, they may reach heaven soon, as we celebrated yesterday, that great solemnity, that great feast of all the saints who have made it to your presence, Lord. As we are the pilgrim church here on earth, we seek to persevere according to your teachings, according to your divine will, so that one day we may enjoy heaven with you for all eternity. We pray in a very special way for all those who are in need of your divine mercy at this time. We ask this in the name of Christ our Lord. Amen. Father, Son, speaking of divine mercy, the Archbishop sent us priests a little email the other day with regards to a new film on Sor Faustina, Sister Faustina, Saint Faustina, which is out now, and it's in the theaters. And apparently, much to everyone's surprise, it's number 2 on the popularity charts, right under the Joker, which is so that must be a joke from Batman, right? So from the Joker to Sister Faustina. But if you have a chance to see it or think about it and talk to your friends about it, because the more people see it, the more popular it stays. You know, they do this. The film industry puts it out one weekend to try it, and if it is popular, they'll keep going, like with the Unplanned movie, right? Unplanned. Yeah, excellent.
My daughter.
To Unplanned? Yes, fantastic. Yes, absolutely. Abby Johnson, who converted from being a manager of one of the abortion clinics of Planned Parenthood. Anyway, we'll talk about that one in the beginning of life course, but anyway, this one, the Archbishop told us about it, so I pass it on. And also, while I'm at it, let me do this now, because once a year there is a dinner here. There is a stone crab dinner. Anyone like stone crabs? Yeah? Okay. And it's they do it as a fundraiser for the athletics, for the sports kids, all right? So I buy a ticket every year, but I have high cholesterol, so I have to stay away from the stone crabs. It's this Sunday night. If anybody wants it, all right, for free, it's $100 value. So if you want it, anyone would like to come this evening, I'm late in giving it out. But if anyone is interested,
I was going to buy it, but nobody was going to go to the dinner. I asked him never, so.
You asked around, yeah, and no one was. Yeah, I think it starts at 6 p.m. Yeah, it starts
and
at
it's all
6.
stuff you can eat, apparently.
Exactly. All the ones you can stuff in, and then the next day, don't go to the doctor. Don't measure the cholesterol. Go to the gym. But anyway, here it is, and it's in the. It's here on campus. Okay, tomorrow starts at 6, and then the dinner is at 7. Or if you know someone who might be interested. Okay, ready? First, I want to ask, is it? Yeah, it's recording already. Oh yeah, the lights, ready? I want to ask if anyone has any questions about anything or comments or anything. No? Okay, well, maybe something will come up as we go along. I'm just going to do a very brief review of the 2 main topics of last week, which again, I apologize, couldn't be here in full force, but you saw those videos there. So with the videos, Could you follow along well enough? Yes, in general, could be followed. And I think the outline also helps, right? To give you an outline and the PowerPoint. Did I send the PowerPoint? I think I sent the PowerPoint, and I think for one it's a, yeah, it's a PDF.
One of the outlines that you went more into detail, it helps us a lot because it's
Yes.
complicated.
It had,
Subject.
yes.
It helps us like flesh out.
Yeah.
better.
Was it on the 4 forces or was it on variation? Variation. Okay, we'll get to it. So just very briefly, these are the 4 main forces that drive evolution at the physical level. All right. Meyer has about 7, but that's because he splits a few of them. For example, he has recombination and mutation separately, but I lump them together in the general topic of mutation. Okay, so mutation, migration, drift, and selection. Selection is what we're going to be covering today in greater detail. But basically the other 3 then, we can take a look just briefly, review in case anyone has any questions or comments. First, starting with the structure of DNA at the primary level, which is the sequence itself, the letter sequence. And you know that if we have just a sequence of one strand, we can decipher the sequence of the other strand because they are complementary, right? Complementary, these are keywords. Complementary means that A always pairs with T and C always pairs with G and vice versa. So if we have one sequence, which is called the leading strand, right? Then we can figure out what is the complementary sequence. As that, 3-dimensionally, we know that it's a helix, which is a double helix. Then that double helix winds upon itself at the first level of winding around a little ball of proteins that are called histones. These histones are highly conserved. What does that mean that they're highly conserved? Highly conserved means it has evolutionary implications. Highly conserved means that the actual sequence of those proteins, the amino acid sequence, is about the same sequence regardless of the species of plant or animal or fungi that we look at, all right? The actual histones are proteins that form this little ball, all right? There are 4 pairs of them, H2, H2A, H2B, H3, H4, and then H1 is a link in between the balls. But the point here is that the actual amino acid sequence of the proteins is about the same, whether it's in the human, in a butterfly, or in a fungus. The sequence, it's highly conserved, all right? So that's pointing to longevity. It means that that sequence was established a long time ago, before we had humans or butterflies or fungi, all right? At the level of a common ancestor for those 3 groups of animals, pine trees, and fungi, to put the 3 kingdoms. That's what it means, highly conserved. So again, keep in mind, like Darwin says, we cannot prove evolution as such, but we can infer it. We can infer it because of this. How can we explain this high conservation of the histone sequences, all right? It means that DNA itself, the structure of DNA, is ancient. In fact, so ancient that it's universal, regardless of the species that we look at today. Of the 2 million that have been discovered so far, they all have DNA as the inheritance molecule, all right? It means that when it got established, it worked, and nature is economic. Nature keeps what works. All right, so then these 4 little balls, these 4 pairs of proteins come together, histones form a little ball, and then the DNA winds around it almost 2 times, 1.7 times if you want to be technical. And that structure, the histone ball plus the DNA wound around it, like a yo-yo, is called a nucleosome. And that's the functional unit of DNA in nature. Again, whether we're talking about the human, the butterfly, or the fungus, or the pine tree that's outside this window, The nucleosome is the basic functional unit of DNA, of the genetic material, all right, of chromatin. Just like the cell itself is a functional unit of all life, of organic life. Okay, then the difference between, so those little histones, those little nucleosomes continue to wind upon each other also, all right? So it's highly compacted. The compaction, in fact, is about 10,000 fold. I don't know if I mentioned 10,000 fold, but to fit 2 meters of DNA, right, inside a cell, that has to be super, super duper wound up. It's like taking a rubber band and twisting it up at its ends. You notice how it coils upon itself? That's the coiling upon coiling. That's the super coiling, all right? It's the same length of rubber band, but now it's crunched up into a little ball. And that's what we mean by compaction. That's fitted into the nucleus of each cell of our body. Now, when the cell is functioning, then all of the DNA is a single molecule. The 3 billion base pairs is a single long, huge molecule, the largest molecule that we can think of, really, all right? And that's called chromatin, when it's in a single molecule, chromatin, all right? And that's when the cell is functioning. In other words, at interface. When every cell, like liver cells are doing their function, nerve cells are doing their function, and so forth. Then when the cell is going to divide, it's going to undergo mitosis, or cell division. Every other metabolic process stops, basically, and concentrates on the reproduction, on the splitting, on the mitosis. And so that chromatin is going to compact further, if that's ever possible, and then chop up into discrete segments that we call chromosomes. You see? Chromosomes. And there's going to be pairs of these chromosomes. There's that backup system. So, I mean, when you look at the whole process, it is super elegant, is what we say in science, all right? How can there not be a creator for this elegance? How can there not be, all right? The odds of this happening strictly by chance, totally, absolutely by chance, are just astronomically impossible, all right? Essentially, it's like an arrow pointing to infinity, toward, like in calculus, toward infinity of impossibility, all right? So there is chance involved, but there is also a certain degree of determinism, if you will, which is that room. And even the chance itself, the laws of chance, right, had to be created, had to be generated. All right, anyway, so when the cell is going to divide, it stops all other functions and concentrates on the division itself, which means duplicating the chromosomes, which we call replication, because scientists don't want people to understand them, so we make up words for simple concepts, right? So we call that duplication of chromosomes, we call it replication. Once the chromosomes are duplicated, so temporarily the cell, when the cell is duplicating or replicating, we have a 4n number. We have double, right? Because then those pairs are going to split into each one of the 2 daughter cells. And the 2 daughter cells will end up with a diploid number. In order for those daughter cells to have a diploid number of chromosomes, they had to be a duplication prior. So it's very simple arithmetic, you know, from 2 to 4, and then the 4 splits back into 2, each of 2 cells, the daughter cells. Okay, so when that happens, the chromatin chops up into discrete segments that we call chromosomes. For each species has a specific number. For the human, we have 23 pairs or 46 total. Some species have the same number, but it's not just the quantity, it's also the quality, what's in the chromosomes themselves. Then we get at the level of the genes, the 10 to 20,000 genes that make up our own genome. All right, and that's what makes the difference there between genotype and genome. The genome is the entire sequence of that makes up our species, including the junk DNA, including the 90%, 97% that doesn't code for any particular protein. Okay, I'm not going to give the whole class again. I'm tempted to, as you can see, but I'm not going to. I just wanted you to be clear at this level of the DNA. So recombination also happens. We'll look at recombination in more detail precisely at the beginning of life course just next semester. Okay? And then the transposons, which are thought to be viral sequences that have incorporated into our genome and into any genome over history, over time, and that's what makes up that junk DNA, all right? Is most likely sequences that integrated precisely in the lysogenics. All of you are in the healthcare field, so you know about the viral infection and the lysogenic stage before it bursts the cell and sequesters the replication machinery of the host itself, right? That's why viruses technically are not living, because they lack that part of self-reproduction. Okay, again, we'll get into this more at the beginning of life course. Lateral gene transfer can happen also in asexual reproduction and non-sexual reproduction, and these are examples of it. More details about mutation, and then mutagens that cause mutation. UV is the big one, but also heat, and also other chemicals, mutagens or carcinogens, right? Okay, we'll get into that later. Yeah. Now, gene flow. Here are zebra, which are obviously migrated. So every population is really in a dynamic state of flow in and out, all right? When we look at the individuals within the population, this herd of zebra are on the move. We don't know if they're immigrating or emigrating from an area. It could be that they're going away from the tiger, so they're emigrating from a particular region, or they're going to greener pastures, which means that they will be immigrating into another region. But either one, immigration or emigration, they're part of migration, right? And so it's a dynamic state. And this is for one species, but actually here we're looking at least at two species that are obvious. What's the one obvious species or one obvious population? The zebra, right? But then that's at the animal level. What about the plant level? There is a stable population here that consists, at least just from the naked eye, of two types of plants. One is this little bush that is darker, and the other one is this tall grass that is lighter in color. All right, so we're actually looking just by the naked eye here at three populations. One is an animal population, the other one is two plant populations, right? We drill down into a smaller scale, for example, at the level of insects, we're going to find another huge population of very different species there. We drill further down into the microbiota that is there, even larger numbers of populations. If we drill down further into the bacterial level, again, it augments, right? So we can use our imagination for that. This is also serves to point out variation, because as we see, not all zebras are alike. And Darwin makes a big point on variation. That's why he kind of shies away from the concept of species, because it says each individual within a species really is different from each other, right? From the other next individual. And you can see that the pattern, right, on these three zebras, for example, at the level of detail is actually different. And even though the general pattern is the same, stripes from black to white, the specific pattern is actually different, okay? And we don't know, because we're not zebras, who selects on what. Let's say that all these are females and there's an alpha male in here. He may have a preference for more black or more white. We don't know. And we'll never know because we're not zebras, okay? But at the male level of the alpha zebra here, he may have a preference. Who knows?
So is that an example of alleles?
Yes.
That they have the same stripes, but they're slightly different patterns? Is
It
that
could
what an
be.
allele would be?
Yes, it could be. I'm not really that versed in zebra genetics, but yes.
But I mean,
Yes.
that's what it means. It's the same trait, but it's a little bit.
It could be,
varied
but
from
keep in
individual to
mind,
individual.
okay, let me answer your question with another question. When we look at these three zebras here, or four if you want to include this one here, all right? We're looking at the pattern, at the stripe pattern. We're looking at genotype or phenotype? Exactly. So to get from genotype to phenotype, a lot had to happen, including the nutrition that this particular zebra ate on that particular day of this particular grass and not this other grass. So that may have an effect. The actual nutrients that are on this grass that may affect the zebra pattern. I don't know, but it could, all right? So keep in mind when we go, there's a long road from genotype to phenotype. What we observe is a phenotype. The genotype is hidden, but it's in there. And that, the allele issue is at the level of genotype. And typically has to do with the dominant recessive thing, but most time is multivariate. Because dominant recessive is rather simple, it's Mendelian, which most characteristics are not Mendelian. That's why the other lecture on variation, most characteristics are quantitative, that there is a range. And that's telling us an interaction of genes with the environment to cause that variation. Example, human height. We just don't have tall and short people. We have a whole range of them. Everything.
Different skin color.
Yes, that's right. The skin, the size, I mean, you name it. Just about any characteristic that we see, there's going to be a range. All right, here, for example, just to the naked eye, boom, like that, how many species do you see here? At least 2, right? There's this green thing that looks like a creeping plant, and then there's this tufty thing that looks like a grassy plant, right? They're obviously different. And so, and we have, how many populations?
3.
Yeah, and maybe 4. So this is obviously one population, right? How about this one? There's another population, but there's a barrier. A thin little barrier, but it's a barrier. Then there are these little tufts. It's a more sparse, but one could make a case that this is a pioneer population of the tufty grass. All right. Then there's this other little patch here that looks like this guy and this guy, but it's also isolated. So this could be another population. So we have 3 populations of this creepy grass and 1 population of the tufty grass. Population biology. All right. The dispersal, for example, the pine forests that are in Canada, most of Canada, especially what is known as the Northern Territories, are pine forests, coniferous forests. You know that the territory of Canada is actually larger than the US, maybe double the size. And most of it upstairs is uninhabitable because it's so cold, or permafrost, which means that the ground is frozen. But anyway, the dispersal is by seed, and these guys fly in the wind. So it's a very wide range of dispersal, In contrast to the sloth, now you know that there are 2-toed sloths and 3-toed sloths, right? And those are 2 of the main groups, and this guy is a 3-toed sloth. There it is. Okay, but these guys don't move more than maybe 1 mile within the place that they were born in their whole lifetime. I actually saw some of these live in Panama when I went to visit my parents down there. And they're very sluggish, and sometimes they get off the tree, seldom they get off the tree, and they cross the road. And it will take them several hours to cross the road because they're very, very, very slow. And you see the traffic backed up on both sides of the highway or the road because the sloth is crossing the road. And so their range is very, very limited. Go figure, they have survived that way. Adaptation. Okay, it's a dynamic state, so we can see that the core, the center, physically, the center of the population is going to be more stable. Like on average, the pollen hangs around in this area among these flowers, and the interpollination will occur here. So that's going to be more limited. That's going to like hold, if you will, the core of the genome of that species, whatever these daisies are. But then at the edge, there's going to be more variation, and these will tend to creep outside. They're at the edge of the population. So this population of daisies will tend to invade this other population of lilies or whatever it is over here, the purple ones. And you can see that the purple ones over here are also invading, if you will, or penetrating the daisy patch. Sorry, salvia, okay, salvia, wild salvia. And then there are other populations here of the fuzzy green one here and the grayish, so several populations. There are also grasses here. So it's a dynamic state of several populations intermingling. They're not competing for the same nutrients, otherwise they wouldn't be able to survive together. All right, that's the competitive exclusion principle. Also, it happens with mold, for example, which is a type of fungus. There is the core of the population, and then there is the boundary. If this medium has antibiotics in it, where do you think is going to be more affected, at the core or at the boundary? At the boundary is going to be more affected if we put antibiotics on the medium, okay? So the boundary is going to be under selective pressure. And we can see here, for example, this is an actual microphotograph of bacteria at the individual level, which you can see. This is the core, which is relatively isolated from the environment, but at the edge, and maybe that's why this changing color, they're going to be more stressed because of whatever environmental influence is there. So the tendency for mutation is going to be greater at the edge than at the core. And this is at the microscopic level for sure. So you can reproduce this a gazillion times all over the planet, wherever there is some kind of nutrient available for bacteria to grow, right? Because we don't live in a sterile environment. Okay, so you can see really that selection is acting all the time, and there's that pressure that is there for survival or not. Pioneer species, again, we'll look at this in more detail when we get into the environmental course in the summer, but basically pioneer starts with a few species that colonize a barren area, lichens that are able to grow literally on rock, and they secrete some acid that actually is dissolving the rock little by little, because rocks tend to be more on the basic side or alkaline side. I'm not going to get into it, but pioneers start with individual species and individuals within the species that establish a whole colony. So there we can see the bottleneck issue of these particular individuals are representing that whole species. But they are limited in their particular characteristics within the species. Again, the drift is when some individuals drift, all right, or by chance, so swimming around, or it can be on land, whatever, at the individual level, whatever genes this particular individual brings, which is a tang, it's a blue tang that is of the same species as all these other guys, but you can see there's a little variation. Just look at the nose, look at the face coloration, all right? So within species, there is variation among individuals. And that, once we drill into the detail, we see it. And yet they belong to the same species because the intuition is that they can interbreed. Okay, bottleneck, you can see it here. Here seems to be a more or less even distribution of yellow and blue, representing individuals within a species, all right? Just concentrating on two variants, or yeah, two variants of one characteristic. When they go through a bottleneck event, all right, it could be climatological, it could be geographical, etc. The individuals that actually make it through the bottleneck, whatever that bottleneck is, you can see that it's not an even distribution. If you count the balls here individually, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of the blue, but only 2 of the yellow. So we got 7 blue variants and 2 yellow variants. When those start reproducing and proliferating, let's say they duplicate at every generation, eventually we end up with more blue than yellow. So population 2, or the next generation, has a different distribution than the original, than the parent population, simply because of the bottleneck issue and the specific individuals that got through the bottleneck. all right? By chance, these 2 out of the 3 green beetles were in the wrong place at the wrong time, by chance. You know, no one told these beetles beforehand or say, shoe coming your way. So only the one green made it through. That made a shift in the variance of this original population, all right? So that's the stochastic process, that's the chance event there, which is integral part of the evolution thing. Okay, so drift can also happen whether at the biological level or the abiotic, non-living factors like lightning, for example, or temperature or humidity, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, hold on to a selection which we'll get on to today in a more detailed way. Talked already quite a bit about variation, but just for the sake of completion, let's look at it for a moment. Yeah. All right, also variation could occur at these 4 different levels, right? The morphological, the physiological, the molecular, and the behavioral. The behavior is also part of selective exposure, if you will, including plants and fungi, of the 3 main kingdoms, of the 3 macroscopic kingdoms, right? Plants, animals, and fungi. We're keeping the classification simple, that we can see with the naked eye in the middle world, right? What is behavior? Animal behavior is obvious, but what about plant behavior? How can they behave if they don't have a nervous system? Well, by analogy, it's going to be a biochemical system. Roots naturally search for water, humidity. What's driving them is humidity. So they have what is called a positive hydrotropism. They go toward water. Roots also have what is known as a positive geotropism. They're also attracted by gravity, physiological, all right? So that's root behavior, which is part of the plant. On the other side, what is above the ground is called the shoot system. The shoots, we got the root and the shoot. What kind of reaction to light does the shoot have? A positive phototropism, has a positive attraction to light. Plants are trying to get to the sun. They're trying to reach the source of light. Okay, so they're attracted. They'll never get there because they're anchored. All right, I can leave the atmosphere, but they're attracted to light. So they have a positive phototropism. At the same time, they have a negative geotropism. They literally go against gravity, the top of the plant, the shoot of the plant. So that's plant behavior. Plants are attracted to light. That's a plant behavior without a nervous system. The equivalent is there is a very sophisticated biochemical system that is driving that, including photosynthesis and all that. Okay? Okay, the whole issue about the twins, the identical twins, Claire and Laura, is that even monozygotic twins, identical twins, are only 99.99999% identical. But there is that 0.00001% of non-identity that makes them unique, all right? At all 4 levels, at the morphological level, at the physiological level, at the molecular level. Ultimately, it's down to the molecular level, right? And also the behavioral level. Just to go to the 4th level, how is it that from this photograph, we can tell that obviously they behave differently, at least in some aspect? It may be casual, it may be superfluous or not, but how can we tell from this photo that Claire and Laura have unique behaviors, different behavior from each other? They're dressed, right? And they're dressed differently, even though they're identical twins. So they have different choices, at least for that particular day when they're both getting this certificate or whatever, they dress differently. That's behavior. We can call it as inconsequential. Maybe yes, maybe not. Maybe has a sexual selective attraction, and then it's not inconsequential because then it may be about mate choice. All right, so that behavior, which may seem inconsequential to us as we dress, may actually have a big consequence with regards to finding a partner and eventually a progeny that may not have come if I had dressed a different way. Okay, so what may seem inconsequential at first, it may actually be more consequential later. They also seem to smile in a different way and so forth. So when we look at the detail, it's obvious that even behaviorally, there is uniqueness among identical twins, right? Identical siblings. So if there's a difference between identical siblings, imagine non-identical, imagine just the rest of us. So variation, 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 and that is Darwin's big thing, because selection is going to act on variation. But it's going to act on it mostly during stressful times. Okay, quantitative traits, range. The range can be narrow, can be wide, but then selection is going to be acting upon that range, especially when there is a stressor. A stressor, which could be a significant climatological change. Typically, it's the biggest stressor and driver of evolution. Okay, I listed here the 5 evolutionary theories, if you will, of Darwin, or 5 aspects of his theory, and then I gave examples for each. The variation, the branching effect, the phylogenetics, and all this leading to the 5th one, which is this selection thing. So, any issues that came up or were not clear on the videos? Of course, one can go into much further detail in any one of these, but the typical thing of our time, there's no time, right? What I'm trying to do, again, periodically, it's good to back up and look at the big picture. What I'm trying to do is to provide for you the overwhelming evidence that is out there for a process of evolution, which talks about the how of the species that we can see today. You know, their origin, mechanically, if you will, physiologically, that they exist today, or we exist today because we all have these common ancestors. I have not talked about the why in the big picture, all right? And sometimes in science, we do ask the question why a lot, but it's a limited why. We're actually asking how in science, how it comes about. The big why question is more of a philosophical, or even at a deeper level, a theological question. Because the why question is a question of meaning. Where do we really come from? You know, existentially, what does it mean to be human? All right? And where are we going? So those are philosophical and even better theological questions. So once we talk about theology, then it implies the existence of God, which is the one thing that I don't question in the whole program. Everything else is up for grabs, all right? And we can question everything else. But the question of God, you know, it's a question of belief. And that's where we have no proof. And there's a little saying, we learn it early on in the seminary, just in case, and we keep it in the back pocket all the time. We say, for those who believe, no proof is necessary. For those who don't believe, no proof is sufficient. Okay, and so, but that's at the level of belief. For now, we're still at the level of fact.
What do those, I mean,
Get it
like
out.
all my life, I basically, believe evolution, I don't question it, it seems.
Yeah.
But other people don't, and they are so vociferous in their opposition.
Yeah.
With the exception of the Bible, which you understand that some people do take as the divine, absolute word of God, which you
Right.
said that we don't use the Bible solely. It's inspired.
As scripture and tradition, that's one aspect, but also the interpretation of the Bible.
Exactly. So what do other, or those who are strict creationists, what do they cite besides the Bible? Or
Right.
is that
Okay.
their major bedrock? I mean, what is it that they
Yeah.
use?
Thank you. So several things come to mind. First of all, the Bible, we can say for the Judeo-Christian tradition, which already includes Jews, all the different branches of Judaism, which are about 6 more or less, from the Reform, the super liberal to the ultra-Orthodox or super conservative, several branches already in Judaism. So even that is not necessarily monolithic, but theologically it would be with the belief in one God. But then Christianity also, which again, we have the polymorphism of Christianity, sadly, because Jesus came to found one church upon Peter the rock. And in 2,000 years, in a mere 2,000 years, we have all these different denominations, Protestant, Orthodox, and Christian, and Catholics. And even within those, we have subdivisions, right? Because not all Protestants are alike, and even not Orthodox are alike, and even not all Catholics are alike. So there's a branching effect just naturally, even among religions. Beyond the Judeo-Christian tradition, there are also many other religious traditions. For example, Hindu, Islam, Buddhist, Shinto for Japan, you name it, even the animist religions of Africa, literally hundreds, if not thousands of religious traditions. They all have their own traditions, whether it's written or oral, all right? And they all have, one way or another, creation stories or creation narratives. Many of them tend to be polytheistic, even though within those polytheistic religions, they also tend to have one major god, like, for example, Ra for Egypt, which is the god of the Nile, and Brahma for the Hindus, and so on and so forth. Okay, so they all tend to have one major god, even within their Zeus for the Greek, and Jupiter, or I think Jupiter for the Greek, and Zeus for the Romans, etc. But they all have a narrative of creation, an origins narrative, which is mythological and typically very rich, but pre-scientific. None of them really follow an evolutionary type of process, except the Judeo-Christian tradition, precisely in Genesis 1 and 2. All right, which is kind of very interesting. So for the fundamentalist or the creationist, with all due respect, what may be missing for them is the facts of science, the facts of science, the facts of what we see outside of this wall, which exists whether we believe it or not, whether we understand it or not, whether we like it or not. By converse, just to be inclusive in today's society, the brazen evolutionist who discards the belief of God because they think that believing in evolution has to exclude the belief in God and any supernatural intervention or power and so forth. What they're missing is two things. Number one, a little theology, and number two, a little humility. Because even our understanding of nature is going to be limited. It's going to be limited not just by what we have not discovered yet, which, for example, in biology, it's about 90% of the species that are supposed to be existing or estimated to exist, right? I don't know exactly how they come up with that 90%, but that's what is of the people in the know. But also the fact that even our thinking process, our very thinking process that is going on right now between you and us, between you and me, is limited to an organic process within the brain. So it is literally, physically, physiologically, our thinking process that is going on right now, what I'm articulating as words, which are thoughts originally in my mind that you're perceiving through your ears and interpreting in your cortex, is subject to a biochemical process, a very specific biochemical process of pathways on the cortex, on the cerebral cortex of each one of us. So the mind is subject to the brain, right? Brain being the organic matter, the gray and the white matter that makes our brain, and the mind being the thought process that is going on right now as you are understanding more or less what I'm trying to say. Which to another individual that doesn't speak English, for example, is just noise, right? But we who do speak English understand, make something, some meaning out of this noise. So what I'm trying to say is that even us, in our most abstract thoughts, are subject to an organic and biochemical process that is happening at this particular time in our brains, which is limited because it's this particular process and not this other process. In a hypothetical brain that perhaps is not carbon-based, but would be silicon-based, for example.
But I think my question is, so the idea, if you're agnostic or atheist and you don't believe in creator, which I'm not debating,
Right.
we've already said that.
Right,
You have science to back you up.
right, on the
If
facts.
you are on the facts, and
Yeah.
if you are like us and we believe that there is a God and that now we're just sort of sussing out the details.
Right,
The issue with others, it
The
is
others.
simply that they believe because of
believers, yeah,
the myths or the Bible story or,
right.
and so do any of their, besides the Bible, is there any science that could give them credence? Or do they just not accept it? It is simply the word, it is simply the Bible, and that's it because that's it.
Okay, Shaban, I think it's an open question really that you're raising, okay, and each individual would have to address it. But in my experience in dealing with fundamentalists on one side and acerbic evolutionists on the other side, right? What I find on the creationist side is that they want to be faithful to God, and they want to be faithful to the Word of God. And there are plenty of passages in the Word of God that says, in the Bible, that says, not one iota of this word will be changed, you know, and you have to be faithful to God's word. Otherwise, you're being unfaithful. One is being unfaithful. One doesn't want to be unfaithful to God. So they're kind of, I'm thinking that they're either kind of scared of being unfaithful to God, disloyal, and offending God, the Creator, by questioning His word or passing judgment on His word, all right? But yet, again, with all due respect, I think a lot of this is subconscious because they haven't thought about it. They haven't taken this course, okay, to challenge them. But the thing is this, if they look at the Word of God for a moment, just dispassionately, literally, first of all, there are at least minimally 2 levels of conflict and problem. They're not reading the originals because we just don't have the originals. Okay, we don't have the original text of anything of the 72 books in the Bible, 46 in the Old Testament, 27 in the New Testament. We don't have the originals. What we have is copies of copies of copies that have survived and fragments. But at the end of the day, when I'm reading it today, when I'm reading the Bible today, I read it in English or Spanish or Italian, which were non-existent 2,000 years ago, let alone 3,000 years ago. So I'm already basing what I'm reading, the Word of God, is an interpretation of someone who translated some kind of copy. So we're dealing with translations of translations of translations. And again, sticking to Italian, there's a little saying in Italian, traduttore traditore, translator, traitor. Right? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Saint Jerome, the Vulgate. Saint Jerome went to a cave in Jerusalem because he was such a harsh man that he was eating people alive. He became a saint. But he became a saint for his piety, and he figured out that the only way that he could save his soul, not chewing people alive, was to go to a cave, and he was so erudite, he knew Greek, Hebrew, and Latin, and so he took the Hebrew scriptures of the Old Testament and the Greek scriptures of the New Testament and translated into Latin. And that's called the Vulgate. And that is basically the bottleneck, the funnel through which the 73 books went through, the 72 books, and today we have copies, we have translations into modern languages of the Latin Vulgate. Went through one human individual, Jerome, Saint Jerome, which already by biblical scholars have been proven that he made a few mistakes, a few errors, a few traditore, traders, a few editorials in his translation. And that's what we have the Bible today, translated into about 2,000 different languages, of the 7,000 languages that exist. Okay? So that's one level of difficulty by taking the Bible literally. Second level of difficulty is even if you take this translation, assuming that it is the exact word of God, like Muhammad got the Quran from Allah directly, all right? There are internal contradictions, which I'm going to save until we get to that lecture in a few, 2 or 3 lectures. We're going to get to that when we look at the Bible in detail. And there are internal contradictions if you take it literally. So what's the alternative? We have to interpret. Okay, and we ask inspiration from the Lord, and then that's why we get into biblical studies, because there are experts who have devoted their entire life to studying sacred scripture, to put it in the context of the time. Many of them are Franciscans who live in the Holy Land, the Franciscans of the Holy Land, who are versed in Greek and Latin and Hebrew and Aramaic, and they know these languages, and they have studied the fragments that are left in the Museum of the Bible in Jerusalem, where they have the originals of the scrolls of pieces that have been found. And these are scholars, so they complement that knowledge, right? Just like the devil is in the detail, the Lord is also in the detail, right? And that's where we need to get. So it's an open question, all right? I think that by the time we get to the end of this course, some of that will be answered. But just like Einstein said, the more questions we answer, the more questions we have. Exactly. And he has the analogy in a dark room, a flashlight, which shines a circle of light. That's what we know. As time passes, it's like moving the flashlight away from the screen, the light becomes larger, right? And the perimeter, of course, is the darkness that we don't know. So as the light gets brighter, in other words, with the passage of time, we know more, there's more light, but guess what? The perimeter, the circumference also gets bigger. So the more we know, the more we know we don't know. And the more we know that we don't know. It's the quest of knowledge and what drives us to know. It drives science, it drives art, it drives humanity, it drives life for the serious person. The person who takes seriously life. It's an exciting journey of a quest of knowledge, including our religious knowledge, our integration of the religious knowledge. Okay, so let's hold on to that question. Let's keep it in mind, because this is what this course is all about, precisely. Questioning our origins at the level of the species as a whole, not individual, but at the level of the human origin. Okay, so selection. And in selection, we're going to look at 3 types of selection, all right? But really in nature, 2, which are natural selection and sexual selection. And they're distinct because natural selection presupposes random mating, which is seldom the case out there, possibly more with plants than animals. But natural selection presumes random mating. However, in sexual selection, it is definitely non-random, okay? And so we have to distinguish them, but they both occur in nature. Whereas artificial selection, by definition, is what we humans do, mimicking natural selection, but speeding up the clock because there's a will engaged, as opposed to natural selection where there is no real will as such, okay? And we have to grant them, the evolutionists, the argument that natural selection is not really driven at the species level by a directed process, okay? Again, getting ahead of myself a little bit because of the excitement of the topic. So let's look at just artificial selection for a moment, of which we are experts. No other animal does artificial selection, but we seem to love it. What's this? St. Jerome issues with editorials. I don't know what that is, but okay. It's embedded in there. All right, so let's look at artificial selection. We do selection, all right? For example, the apple. The wild apple used to be a little thing. To this day, it's called the crab apple. And it's a tree that is out there in nature. It's really the size of a cherry, more or less. That's the original wild apple. And then we selected on the apple to the point where we have all these varieties of apples, right? All these varieties. And here are two varieties, obviously selecting on size and maybe flavor. We don't know until we taste it. But how is that done? Well, we start with a crab apple and we plant several trees of the same crab apple, right? Those trees will grow and produce little crab apples. And if we select it on size, right, because we want to make the apple bigger, then what are we going to do? We're just going to pick the larger crab apples and plant those, the larger apples themselves, right, that just look larger to the naked eye, and let them rot and plant that seed in the hope that that seed carries the gene for a little bigger crab apple. Then we let that second crop grow and select again on the larger of the progeny and plant that one. The third generation, the idea is that with every generation, we're selecting for bigger size, and the bigger size will happen. But there's going to be a range. In every generation, there's going to be a range, right? So if we continue to select on the larger, eventually, over many generations, we can come up with a very large apple. That's just selecting. At what level are we selecting? Morphology, physiology, molecular, or behavioral? Subconsciously, all four, but just by the naked eye, we're selecting on morphology, the structure, not physiology. We don't know how the apple is functioning internally, all right? We're selecting on morphology, on the shape, on the size of the apple. Of course, minimally, molecular is there because we're thinking that it stands to reason that the more dominant genes for size are going to be on the larger apples, okay? But at face value, we're selecting on morphology. Okay, just to bring in the four different levels of selection, of variation. So we can do that generation after generation, but if the crab apple takes, let's say, 3 years to produce an apple from seed to fruit, 3 times 3 times 3 times 3, generation after generation starts adding up in years, right? The years will turn into decades. We can do that faster now, precisely if we drill at the molecular level, because we have genomics and we have the capacity to abstract the DNA of the apple and all this. And we can go, so typically plants, they reproduce sexually, right? So they're going to be haploid or diploid. The plant itself is going to be diploid. The gametes are going to be haploid. But haploid gametes implies a diploid species, a diploid plant or animal. So we can drill right into the genome and take out the genome and clone it into the zygote of the next generation and make the plant actually 4N, the entire genome inserted into a zygote, and make that gene, that zygote generation 4N, duplicating the genome, the entire genome, not individual chromosomes, but the entire genome, okay? And voila, for the next generation, the apple now is super large because duplicating the genome in plants tends to increase in size, all right? And that's how many of these, especially for the fruit, have gotten so large in today's agriculture, in today's artificial selection.
And taking the seed size down, like seedless watermelon and seedless grapes and
Yes.
like that, they're bred specifically, or
Right. So again, two alternatives. If you do it at the morphological level, let's say you have this vine, grapevine, and the vine puts out clusters, and each cluster will have 50 grapes. You have to go through each grape. On average, there may be one grape in that whole cluster that doesn't have any seeds. And then there's a quandary. How do you actually, what you need is a whole cluster to have no seeds. And then what you do is you graft that cluster. That where the cluster came from, you take the stem and you graft that into another grapevine. And hopefully that graft will produce seedless clusters.
Well, look at, I'm just reading up about the Cosmic Crisp apple, the new one that's being introduced.
Oh, yeah? Okay.
It's saying that it's intended to have the texture and juiciness of the honey crisp, long
Okay.
storage of the enterprise, and it's been in
Okay.
for 12 million trees to try to produce it. That's what they've had to,
Select on. Yeah.
Yep.
Wow.
it's taken within 3 years, over 13 million cosmic trees and distributed over 100,000 seedlings.
Amazing. So they're going on the morphological side. I don't know. Does it say what genome does it have? Is it 2N or 4N or
I lost it.
8N? I don't know if it says the genome.
Go back. But that's one of the things that is so amazing, because when you talk about what they've been looking, that they specifically were targeting this and this
Right.
and this and this.
Particular qualities, exactly. Exactly. So that would be the seedless one. Now, so that would be kind of the labor-intensive way to do it, by grafting. The molecular way, more expensive but faster, would be to decipher which gene in the grape genome codes for seed, and exert that or disrupt it, mutate it, and leave intact the rest of the genome. Since that gene is either exerted or mutated, just cause a disruption on it, frame shift, for example, then that new zygote should not produce any seeds.
But then you have to do that every time, because if there's no seeds, it can't.
No, if you do it at the genetic level, at the genotype, it will be passed on.
And it grows without seeds?
Yeah, but you have to grow it, so you have to grow it asexual by vegetated propagation. By tufts, looks like, for example, the bromeliad that has little babies that come on the side, you have to do it by vegetated propagation. You know, stalks. So they chop it up into stalks, and the stalks will be retransplanted. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but the genetics, the genetic manipulation, that's the GMOs, right? The genetically modified organisms, bypasses the labor intensive of having to grow generation after generation and select it on a particular characteristic or a combination of it. So this area of functional genomics is very big today, and it has a lot of industrial applications, commercial applications. It also has applications not only for food and nutrition, it also has application for the pet industry, okay? Because here you have little parakeets, which are all the same species, but look at the variants. These are breeds, just like the dogs, okay? These are all same species, but all different variants. And so people like one more than the other, et cetera, et cetera. The good old lovebirds, right? And I imagine as these interbreed, they're going to produce more variants upon variants. With plants also, and this is what Darwin picked up on originally, looking at the wild mustard by artificial selection in the old world, meaning in Europe for centuries. This had been going on, and it caught Darwin's attention that from wild mustard, agriculture, farmers got the cauliflower, the broccoli, the cabbage, the kale, and this kohlrabi thing, which I've never tasted, just come from different parts of the plant by selecting on different parts of the plants.
So all those 5 vegetables come from wild mustard?
From wild mustard originally, yes.
That's why they hurt you.
Sorry?
That's why they hurt you the same.
They hurt you?
I mean, they,
Okay, right.
They cause the same issues.
Yeah, because at the biochemical level, they have similar ingredients. They have the same genome essentially inside, okay? Yeah, just like today's apples all come from little wild crab apples.
That's a common ancestor, wild mustard.
Well, no. It's not a common ancestor because we cannot have contemporary ancestors. The wild mustard still lives today. This has been done by artificial selection, remember?
Okay, all right.
But that's done by
It would be
farmers in the
equivalent.
field,
In
right?
natural selection, it would be equivalent. The only thing in natural selection, we wouldn't have the wild mustard any longer. It would be a fossil. Because they would have taken eons. This would have taken hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years to happen in the wild. because it would have been a process essentially by chance. In other words, there would have to be some selective advantage to being a cauliflower instead of being a wild mustard, which is counterintuitive because this is more nutritious. So you would think that this would be selected out faster than the wild mustard. In other words, probably the wild mustard is more insipid and less tasty than the cauliflower or the broccoli. So in the wild, probably this would have never happened, most likely. Because it goes against, wild mustard has a better chance of survival than nutritious things that come from it.
Yeah, hard to weeds.
Right? Yeah. Weeds survive. In fact, weeds typically survival things are bitter taste and so forth, right? Even to the level of poisons. The featherless chicken, which is real because think about it. It's labor intensive to take those feathers off, right? I mean, most of us don't eat chicken with feathers, so they got to be taken off. And imagine how many millions of chicken are eaten every day throughout the world. It's probably one of the most common meat sources. All right. And so, yeah, you determine which is the feather gene and disrupt it, and you get featherless chickens. But they have to be protected because they're super sensitive to UV. They can literally cook alive if they go out into the sun. They have no protection. So they have to keep kept in indoors for sure. And not only indoors, they also have to keep kept warm because now since they're warm-blooded, but they don't have the source of keeping their body warm because they lost their feathers. It's like if we shave totally our hair, we're gonna get very cold because the hair is what's holding on to our heat at the level of the
That's
skin.
A GMO chicken.
Sorry?
That's a GMO chicken.
Yes.
Okay, so to me, that's an ethical question in itself, is should we do that to a chicken? Which
Well-
I realize they're just chickens, but
But for GMO, we'll have to have the gene from a different species.
okay.
Yeah, you're right. Exactly. We have to have some gene.
Suppression of the gene doesn't necessarily make that chicken a chimera. Something weird. Right there, when you see cage-free eggs, by definition, for what you're saying, it's not from those chickens. If you have it free range, it's gonna get affected.
Right.
These are the ones that they keep in the tight places, producing.
But the idea of what you're saying is suppression isn't the same thing as modification.
Yeah,
It's sort of a
explain that.
distinction without a difference. I mean, it is a modification. I mean, yes, technically it's a suppression,
Right.
but it is also a modification.
It is
because you
also a mod-
suppressed it. So now
Yes.
the question, is it ethical?
Maybe, but
Right.
that's from the health issue. From the health issue, we don't know what a foreign gene is gonna cause on the consumers of that animal. But in that case, the suppression, I don't think that would be an issue. Right?
Some people may have an issue with it, and essentially at the ethical side. So let's look at it because this is bioethics. Exactly. Yes. So what if, so having the feathers on the chicken is more labor intensive, right? Because then the chicken has to be plucked. I assume that the chicken is plucked when the chicken is killed, once the chicken is killed, right? Not plucked alive, because then that would be extremely painful and kind of awkward to do also. So let's assume that the chicken is killed before it's plucked. That makes it easier to pluck, but it's still labor intensive. So it could be a source of revenue for the people who work in the plucking business, right? And also to use the feathers for making pillows or whatever else. On the other side, that may drive up the price of the chicken because now the chicken has to be plucked by hand, which I don't know if there's a machine that plucks chickens. I really don't know. I doubt it because that machine may be a little too rough on the animal, on the skin, or may actually destroy the skin, the integrity. So if it's done by hand, it's labor intensive, it's gonna drive up the price, okay? And so now fewer people can buy chickens, which
Well,
is
it's gonna
already,
drive up the price too, you gotta keep the chickens in a special environment where they're always
Yes.
warmer than others, and
so what is more cost effective?
Right.
That's where the business world comes in and sees what is more effective. to pay for labor to pluck the chicken, or to have these huge hangars where you have thousands of chickens inside and use the same temperature for them all, et cetera, et cetera. So they're basically kept in cages for their life. Now, what's the alternative? The wild chicken, which again, it's going to be much smaller, right? Because they're also fed and hydrated and made larger. Chickens today in the supermarket, I mean, they look like mini turkeys. They look like small turkeys. That's not a wild chicken, is maybe 1/4 that size. It's a little thing that we would see, oh, that's kind of a sickly little chicken. No, that's the wild chicken. It's much smaller. It's closer to the actual size of a bird. Mm-hmm. So it's a trade-off. Right. If by making this chicken, keeping the chicken organic, all right, let's say organic, wild and with feathers and not with hormones and all that, is going to actually make it more expensive. So fewer people can afford it, and it becomes now a luxury item. So it's a market thing.
Okay, I agree. My other question though is going back to Louis, what's the other side of the suppression issue? What is GMO, if it's suppression, or what's the other one?
Modification.
Yeah.
Which involves
Right.
what?
In a bacteria, a gene for a bacteria, for example, for resistance to antibiotics, they sequence it and they insert it in the genome of the chicken, and all of a sudden you have a chicken that is not, it's not susceptible to an infection.
So they're adding to the chicken's genome.
Right.
Exactly.
Or the animal, whatever the animal
Exactly.
is.
Yeah. Or the
Whatever.
plants. Yeah, exactly. In other words, taking genes from one species, inserting them into another species. That would be like the broadest.
What's
Yes.
chimera? How do you spell it?
CHIMERA.
DHI.
Like mythology, like a
Right.
centaur
Yes.
or something like that.
Right. It comes from
Yeah, I've heard that
mythology.
word before, but
Right.
that was something else.
Right. So basically, it's a good point, because let's address it. The whole issue of GMOs, genetically modified organisms, right? Let me do this for a moment. Is any species, any gene from one species, or any number of genes from one species inserted into the genome of any other species? That's kind of the broadest definition.
Unrelated species.
Unrelated, yeah. Or related, they could be related or unrelated. Typically, they're unrelated. For example, like Luis said, an example, we have some bacteria that are resistant to certain antibiotics. Okay, we insert that gene into the chicken, which makes the chicken resistant to that infection.
Where is that gene coming from?
The bacteria, in the genome of the bacteria.
Okay, so you're not taking a turkey gene and putting it into a chicken, or a cow gene and putting it.
No, because
confused as to
right, to what
the-
purpose? Think functionally. To what purpose? Why would we put a turkey? What
I
gene
have
of
no
the turkey?
idea. I'm
Right.
seriously, I'm
Well, think about it. No, it has to have a function. No,
Well, think of
it
plants.
has to have a
Maybe you get bigger bird,
utility.
Maybe you get a bigger chicken, I don't know.
No,
Maybe. Okay, so we can put, for example, we can put the size gene. If it's a single, assume it's a single gene. Typically, it's going to be several genes. Many times, interaction of genes. But let's assume, for the sake of argument, that the turkey, which is obviously a larger animal than the chicken, there's a gene for size in turkey. We're going to take that size, that gene for size of the turkey, and put it into the chicken. What's the expectation?
You're gonna have bigger chickens.
The chicken will grow to more or less the size of a turkey, or will grow bigger. Yeah, so that's an example. It depends. If we want bigger chickens without having to give them growth hormones, for example, we could do the GMO route.
Right, and like with plants, like with
Yeah.
Monsanto.
Yeah.
Basically,
Mhm.
Monsanto sells, I guess, corn, or you would know what
Yeah.
else, but
Yeah, corn, wheat.
Monsanto sells beans or corn seeds
Mhm.
that have been genetically modified to
Right.
be resistant to rust or some sort of fungus.
To drought, for example.
Something, okay, whatever the characteristic
Mhm.
is, so then they sell it to the farmers.
Mhm.
But because it's corn and the tassels go every place, other farmers get those seeds, the little pollen that drifts off.
Right.
Then goes into a different field that has not been Monsanto never sold those farmers the seeds. And there's a huge controversy about, well, you're growing the seeds that were ours because we genetically, or, you know, the pollen that came from our plants is now gone to.
You got contaminated by the GMO pollen.
When they modified that plant, they put a patent on it,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
that sequence
Mm-hmm.
that is modified. And then if you grow it, as you said, seeds fly and land in your property and mix with your corn,
Right.
then they can sue you because
It's their
you
patent.
didn't buy it from them.
Right.
But another thing they do is they put the terminator gene. And then if you get it, if you buy the grain to plant,
Mm.
you cannot maintain it yourself. You have to always go back to them.
Yes. So it doesn't produce, it doesn't reproduce essentially.
Right. So
It
you're
doesn't
stuck
reproduce. It's
with
sterile.
everything.
Each generation is sterile.
Modification is serious. I mean,
It is serious, it's tricky, and it's a challenge between the commercialization of it, the privatization of farming and animal husbandry and agriculture versus a basic human right to food and so forth, all right? And the issues of contamination and so forth.
One of the biggest advances,
Mhm.
and I don't know, young Lewis probably know more about this, was when they came up with the golden rice,
Mm.
which I believe was genetically modified, or maybe not genetically, but modified. The rice back,
Mm.
you know, that is so much more fruitful, that the
Right.
quantities that can be harvested are just.
Manyfold, yeah, it gives out
and
tenfold or
you know,
whatever,
fed more people in 4 nations.
right?
But again, it was just how you came up with it, and I believe that was at some point considered genetically modified.
Mm-hmm. That could have been just straight up artificial selection, selecting on the one
Okay,
that produced more, right? There was some famous cow that produced 10 times more milk than any other cow around, but she looked normal. Mhm. And they try to save those genes and see if they can clone that. So, yeah. We have these, so these are, you see, the intersection between the biology and the ethics. Mhm. My purpose for all this was just simply to introduce first the topic of artificial selection, that we humans have been involved in it, not for centuries, but for millennia. First, at a very primitive level. For example, it is thought that perhaps it was Egyptians who managed to domesticate some wolves into what we know today as the dog. Perhaps it came from there. But we see all these animals that are farm animals. These are typically genetically modified, or not genetically, but just by artificial selection, okay? And it's part of what is known as animal husbandry in agriculture. And so we have the plant part of it, but also the animal side, typically for industry, either for food or for transportation or for wool, whatever, or food and wool clothing is animal husbandry. The whole point of this slide is simply to point out that we have been doing artificial selection, and the big difference between this one and natural selection is that this one is done willingly, that we're actually consciously selecting on a particular trait or a number of traits or characteristics.
Father, have you heard or read the book Botany of Desire by Michael Pollan?
No? Michael Pollan?
Fascinating, because one of the things that Pollan talks about, and you were mentioning it
Mhm.
earlier, was plant behavior.
Mm.
Pollan actually talks about the apple and that nature wants to reproduce and nature needs help in doing that, and that they have certain things that it does, and that it actually encouraged, I don't want to say something, you know, thinking humankind
Right.
and animals, but other species actually,
Yeah.
to spread the seeds all over.
Right. Yeah.
And it was a fascinating look at that. It isn't just that man actually plants seeds, that
Right.
the apples knew it needed bigger and better farmlands or land to grow and to reproduce, and that is actually a part of plant behavior. That when you were talking about looking for water or looking for air, that it also knows it needs to reproduce. So it actually can change sort of how humans acted, because that was one of the things with the apple seed. It's a fascinating look at
Interesting. Yeah.
that behavior.
Interesting. Yes, in fact, it was thought, speaking of wheat, is considered that, so the cultural birthplace of Western civilization is considered to be classical Greece, right? The cultural birthplace. But the agricultural birthplace of Western civilization is considered to be the Middle East, precisely the Fertile Crescent. What is today, back then it was Mesopotamia, Babylonia, what is today Iraq, Iran, that area, the Tigris and the Euphrates, those two rivers, which we'll look at later in this course when we talk about the biblical sources. And it is thought to have been about 7,000 years ago, more or less, and it was a serendipity between a wild wheat that started producing larger grains, and the human who discovered that and started selecting on it. So it's a confluence of both nature putting forth some stalks of wheat that actually had larger grains, and some humans that were walking around at that time noticing it and selecting on it, planting those just to see by intuition, well, maybe this larger wheat will continue to be larger as we plant it. And it did, okay? And so wheat is considered to have been the shift for humans between the hunter-gatherer, which was semi-nomad at least, had to be on the go, on the move, to agriculture. The beginning of primary agriculture, settling down, sedentary.
Where you had planted.
Exactly, and settle and stay put. Now that sedentary shift from hunter-gatherer, which was at least semi-nomad, if not fully nomad, moving around, to sedentary allows for free time. Free time allows for development of culture. In other words, beginning of a written language, time enough to sit down and actually write something, because in the hunter-gatherer tradition, there was no time to sit down and even develop tools, because if they were at the survival level, they had to keep moving. But now with agriculture, it allows populations, early populations, to sit down and relax a little, because they don't have to hunt for their food or gather it by dispersal. They have it, they're producing their own food. And then exactly, the animals and the plants, they go kind of hand in hand, especially the animals of labor, and then the animals that they can feed on and so forth. And they'll use part of the plants to feed the animals, right? Herbivores, to keep them in pots and so forth. So it's really the beginning, the agricultural beginning of civilization. And it allows for what we call material culture to develop. Language, art, even pottery, etc. All right, utensils, the domestication of fire, and so forth. So all those factors are the beginning of civilization. 7,000 to 8,000 years ago, more or less.
Oh, you know this, but there's a fantastic book, one of the best books I've ever read. I haven't finished though, because it's pretty dense. I highly recommend it to you. It's by Jared Diamond, the one that the intro works for this book.
The forward, yeah.
It's called Guns, Germs, Steel.
Yeah, Guns, Germs, and Steel.
Society. That is
Excellent.
excellent book.
Uh-huh.
And I
That's
highly
right.
recommend it in college and high school.
Yeah.
Whoever wants to read it.
There's an audio version of it, and yeah, my brother and sister-in-law, we heard it. We heard it as we were driving around the Colorado mountains. We were hearing that whole book. It was fascinating. Very interesting, very detailed. Okay, so anyway, artificial selection, we have been engaged in it voluntarily or involuntarily, all right, for millennia. And we're really mimicking nature here, but fast forward. We put the clock fast forward on this because there's an actual will that is selecting any number of characteristics. Nature does the same, with the difference that it takes its sweet time to do it because it's by chance. It's by chance. It has to wait for the chance mutation to actually be significant and meaningful and to have a selective advantage on the individual where that mutation arises, right? So these are five observations and the conclusions that we can draw from those observations. Now, keep in mind in the background that this implies random mating, right? Random mating. Now let me see, it's already 11, and I'm thinking that perhaps this would be a good time to take a little break. It's a natural break here before we actually go into natural and then sexual selection. So why don't we do that for a moment? It's 11, right? We'll break early on for about 10 minutes and we'll come back. All right, so let's pause this for a moment. Pause recording, about 10 minutes. Okay. Yes, exactly. So we're restarting the recording after the break, and during the break we have been discussing, among other things, some books. So I want to just write them down because these are suggestions that people are making. First, it was it germs? No, guns, germs, and steel.
The fates of human life.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I can look it up by that. And that's Jared Diamond.
Yes.
Yeah, I got it right. Mm-hmm. Not Neil Diamond. It's another. He's dating us. There reminds me of a movie of yeah, with an eye. Oh, okay, look it up here. Probably got it wrong. Oh yes, you're right. Diamond. Yeah. Reminds me of Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, which was a movie that was by Steve Martin. Something different, comedy. Okay, the other one.
Botany of Desire by Michael Pollan, Pollan.
Is it?
Yes,
Okay.
excellent.
All right, super. So these are suggestions. Take a look. Back to natural selection then. These are 5 observations that caught Darwin's attention, and then the conclusions or inferences that he makes from each one of these 5, okay? So this is really grounding his theory of evolution on facts that he observed. So let's go through them, and then I'll have examples of each one as we go along. First, this whole issue of high fertility. You notice that all animals and plants put out a lot of eggs and a lot of zygotes. These eggs, that when they get fertilized, they turn into a lot of zygotes. The vast majority of which never make it to adulthood or even the juvenile stage, okay? And if they did, it would be overwhelming. The earth would not be capable of sustaining all of these new generations that were arising. So there's an overabundance, an overproduction of the next generation. And so he concludes by that the vast majority of gametes either don't get fertilized, or if there is fertilization, the vast majority of zygotes don't survive, all right, much into development. They get essentially eaten up or they die and rot away. You also notice that over time, populations tend to remain stable. There's like a replacement number. As an old tree dies, some new trees are coming into the area. And overall, there seems to be a stability about the nature that we see around us. And so he concluded from that is that the vast majority of individuals, either they don't make it to reproductive age, or if they make it, they don't get to reproduce. Because again, if they did, it would be an exuberant abundance of the next generation. Now, he was observing both animals and plants as he was going along when he was making these observations. He also noticed that typically resources are limited. Resources are limited. That, again, is an obvious reality. There's only this much grass for the cattle that is feeding on this pasture right now. So, because of the limited resources, that puts selective pressure on whoever is needing those resources. And again, it could be plants, animals, fungi, or in the microscopic world, either the protozoans or even at a smaller level, the bacteria. The next observation, no two individuals within a given population are exactly alike, not even monozygotic twins, all right? We've covered that in the variation lecture. So each individual has to survive precisely at the individual level, and there will be a variety of survival depending on the particular characteristics that that individual has, aside from the population as a whole. And finally, that many of these variations are indeed inheritable, whether it's at the phenotypic level, ultimately is at the level of the genotype that gets inherited. So it has the potential for those characteristics to express in the next generation. And it is that over a long period of time, the inheritable variations that may lead eventually to speciation. If we do have indeed speciation, then that is the evolutionary process, no? A new species emerging from a previous species. Now keep in mind that Darwin was looking at this in the 1800s, and the biological definition of species only came about in the 1900s with Meyer. So Darwin really did not have the benefit, if you will, of a formal biological definition of species. That's another reason why he's placing so much emphasis on variation. But there was already the taxonomical definition of species from Linnaeus a couple of centuries prior. So already from the 1700s, the 17th century, we have the taxonomy, the Linnaean taxonomy of genus and species, right? The binomial nomenclature of species, but it's based mostly on phenotype. It's not really based on a biological sexual definition of individuals capable of producing a fertile offspring. Okay, so Darwin is kind of in between those two. The taxonomical definition of species, yes, he had that benefit, but he did not have the benefit of a biological definition. Let's move further then and look at each one of these in a little more detail. So first example, the overabundance of fertility. Okay. I think these are, they may be tadpoles or they may be fish, but these are little embryos of fish eggs that have been fertilized. Maybe they're amphibian, I can't tell exactly. The point is that there's an overabundance. The vast majority of these little embryos will not make it to adulthood, to reproductive adulthood. What's going to happen to them? Most of them are going to get eaten, okay? Sometimes by their own parents. The ones that don't get eaten, many of them are going to get infected by spores, or by fungi or bacteria, and will also die. On average, it will be the weaker ones who will die. The dandelion, for example, imagine how many of these little seeds, right? See the little seed there? Does it take to replace the one parent dandelion? Only one. And each dandelion head probably produces hundreds of seeds. If not, I don't know if it gets to 1,000, it could be 1,000 seeds, okay? But it takes only one of these to reproduce its parents. So thanks be to God that the vast majority of these do not get to germinate and grow to adulthood. Otherwise, the whole earth would be just totally covered with dandelions. There wouldn't be room for anything else. What happens to all those seeds that don't get, well, some are eaten. Most of them actually probably rot away with fungal
The
infection.
rest of them wound up on my lawn.
Exactly. Here, you know what this is in the middle? These are pollen grains, okay? Look at the variety of color and size and shapes just on the morphology. These are all pollen grains. Exactly. So the allergies that are going around, there you have it. Little tufts of alfalfa, I don't know what it is, but you can see sprouts, yeah. On an otherwise barren soil, each one of these from a particular seed, right? Well, even these look so tender and juicy and tasty that most of these probably don't make it to adulthood, so they don't get to pass on their genes. This type of fungus is called, what is this called? Puff, something puff. When they explode, they put out these spores, all right? This is a micro photograph of the spore itself. Each one of these is an individual spore. Imagine the billions of spores that are in here, in this puff, okay? How many of these spores does it take to replace this guy that exploded? One. All right. Examples of overproduction. This cloud is pollen. This is pollen, all right? In other words, each one of these grains, you can see these are conifers, these are pine trees, here are the cones. Typically the cones that we can see with the naked eye, the larger ones, also the female cones. And at the center, inside each one of the scales of the cone will be 1 or 2 eggs that will be fertilized by one of these in the millions, trillions of pollen grains that are put out every season. And that covers all the lawn and all the cars and everything with the yellow dust, right? Eggs of a crab. It's obviously a female crab. You can tell by the abdomen that is rounded off like that. The male doesn't have this shovel-like shape. The male is more pointed like this, all right? Because it doesn't need to hold the clutch of eggs. So this is a female crab full of eggs. These are the gills embedded in there. Somehow she's got to breathe through all that. That's all right, soaked in water. The water gets through it all. But again, of all these little tiny eggs, how many does it take to replace the one crab? Okay, so this is feeding the rest of the animal population that is out there. It is evident then, the inference that the vast majority of gametes either don't fertilize, or if they do fertilize, the vast majority of embryos and zygotes don't make it to reproductive adulthood. Next observation. In nature, it looks like populations remain stable, and that is what is known as the carrying capacity. Each species has a carrying capacity, abbreviated by the letter K, capital K. And the carrying capacity is the maximum number of individuals that actually live in a particular population, in a particular region, local region, at a particular time, okay? You notice that these curves are called sigmoid curves or exponential growth curves. It starts with very low because it's only 1 or 2 individuals. As they start reproducing, this first part is called the lag phase. It lags, okay? But then it goes from lag into log. It goes into an exponential phase, a log phase, because it's duplicating. The population on average is duplicating at every generation, so it ramps up very fast. But eventually, it doesn't continue to ramp up indefinitely. At some point, because there are limited resources, it starts leveling off. And at some point it stabilizes. When it stabilizes like this, what does it mean? That equal number of individuals are coming into the population, or are coming into adulthood, let's say, than the numbers that are dying. Okay, so there's a replacement level that stabilizes the population as long as the resources remain stable. So it's all about the resources that are available. Nutrients, sunlight, amount of water, etc. The resources can be biotic, namely food, or abiotic, environmental conditions. But the typical thing with populations is that they stabilize as long as there's no drastic or catastrophic change in the environment. And in fact, biologists, population biologists study this carrying capacity of each species, whether it's the smallest species of bacteria in a petri dish to the largest species of sperm whales throughout the globe, including all oceans. All right? And pretty much it's established and known that most of the carrying capacity of most species in their particular environment, except for one species. Exactly. We just don't know, because we consider for population purposes that the human species is one population throughout the whole world. Okay, unlike any other species that has isolated populations, more or less. We are one population because in principle, any one individual can reproduce or procreate with any other individual of the opposite sex anywhere else in the world, in principle. Okay, as long as all the conditions are necessary, right? That they're both fertile, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the challenge from the human perspective, and that has bioethical implications because it talks about population explosion and so forth, all right? We'll get to that one again in the environmental course. So, because of this stabilizing factor and this carrying capacity for each environment, he inferred that the vast majority of individuals either don't get to reproductive age, or if they do get to reproductive age, they don't actually reproduce. They don't actually get to mate. The example that I have here, well, this is a little turtle that is obviously a baby turtle, got trapped by a ghost crab on its way to the ocean, to the water. And so this little turtle never got to reproductive age. All right, selected out. Could have been fitness, or it could have been serendipity, because this could have been a very fit turtle, the most fit of the clutch, but the ghost crab happened to be in this path and not the path of the other turtle that was weaker. So the weaker turtle got out to the ocean. Chance, okay? Here we have a part of a clan, I guess they're called, or tribe, of gorillas, or the chimps, no, the chimps, sorry, yeah. And these are alpha males. These are alpha males competing, you know, for a female. So of these 4 alpha males, only one will get to mate with a female. We don't know which one. On average, it would be the strongest one. But it could be that the strongest one that day had a sore tooth and couldn't fight as strong as the others. All right, let's look at then the environmental aspect, because I mentioned several times that there is that the resources are limited. And here are some examples. In the wintertime, for this moose, what is he constrained to eat? Whatever little buds he can find on trees. But after going through a strand of trees, those little buds are going to begin to disappear. So the next moose that comes behind has less food available, all right? Limited resources, especially under harsh conditions like the winter. Here, what's very obvious about this is looking at the vegetation, right? The water source. And so this vegetation is limited to the boundary of the water, to the shore line of the river, and not anywhere else. Anywhere else into the land is asserting that there's plenty of land here where the whole forest could grow, but this other area has no water. So limited resource is water. Therefore, the trees are limited to growing on the shoreline, all right? Assuming that this is fresh water, it's a river. How about for the barnacles here? What was the limited resource? A plastic bottle floating. A plastic bottle floating that was capped, therefore it was floating because of the air inside, and got beached eventually, all right? But that was the limited resource of the bottle. And we can tell also from this photograph which part of the bottle was floating up and which part of the bottle was floating down. Okay, it probably had a little bit of water inside or whatever. At any rate, some part of the bottle has to float down when it's floating, even if it's totally empty of water or liquid. And that bottom part is the one that got clustered and encrusted. What's going to happen eventually here if this bottle had not been beached? The barnacles would eventually, their strongholds, the little things that hold on the proteins, would eventually perforate through, and the aging of the plastic would perforate through. So the long term of this bottle and the barnacles encrusted, if it stayed floating in the middle of the ocean, the pelagic region, would be that its integrity, the bottle's integrity would be compromised and it would start seeping in water and continued deterioration of the plastic. Eventually, the plastic bottle and the barnacles would end up at the bottom of the ocean somewhere. So it's kind of an awkward way of recycling a bottle, but it would recycle the bottle sooner or later. The problem is when you have an overwhelming amount of bottles, not just one or two, but 1 or 200,000 or millions of them floating around in an area. Here, limited resources. There's only one carcass for all these vultures. So again, the competition, okay, sets in. And that's the selective pressure there. On average, it will be the strongest vulture that gets the biggest piece of the carcass, right? Again, just to highlight variation one more time, all zebras, not in this case giraffes, not all giraffes are the same species, but not all individual giraffes are the same pattern. As you can see here, a lot of variation upon the pattern, right? For us, it may just be fun to watch or inconsequential, but it may have something to do with the mating pattern, or more likely the camouflage pattern, right? For getting away from the lion. Facial expression, the face itself, the physiology of the face, which attracts the physiognomy of the face, which is a definite attractor in humans. This lily here is by daylight. This photograph is by daylight, and this photograph is by ultraviolet at night. See the different pattern? Not only do we not see this pattern because it's beyond our visible range, it's ultraviolet. So why would the plant have this? It turns out that some insects do see this pattern, and they're attracted to this particular pattern, not necessarily this one, okay? And so that pattern may be slightly different from this flower than this flower, and this pattern may be more attractive to insects than this one, who knows, or vice versa, but there's variation there even when we don't see it to the naked eye in a range that is beyond our own visible range. This one, these are from also Cuba, right? These are protected now, very special. There's a lot of variety on this one. I don't know if, I can't remember the species of these, but these are very coveted in Cuba. They're in the mangrove areas and the marshy areas and so forth. Yeah, these snails. Pinta? Polimita pinta pinta. There you go. Okay. Yes, they're rather unique and famous.
Super rare.
They are. Yes, yeah,
They have been collected from the wild too much to sell.
exactly, exactly, yeah.
Now they are, I think they are protected. They were protected 30 years ago.
Supposedly, yes,
Probably
yeah,
they're not there anymore.
right,
Is it
yes.
because of the coloration?
Yeah, the pattern, yeah.
Beautiful.
Mhm.
The necklaces.
Yeah, they get cleaned out inside and so, and they're indigenous to Cuba, right? Yeah.
They are they're
Endemic. There's some,
to the legal snail,
Mhm.
the light snail that
Like-
we have here.
yeah, in the Everglades, there's also one that is rare. What is the name of it? In the Everglades?
Apple snail.
Apple?
Apple snail.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have now an invasion of, not the African snail, but it's affected, but we have exotic apple snail.
Oh, yeah, no, but that
We
one,
produce a lot more than our.
yeah, but that's Asian or something. No, that's an invasive. That's an exotic.
We have several invasives.
Yes.
We have an African snail.
Yeah, the big one.
That is
Brown.
big one with a cone and
Right.
produces
Slug.
tremendous amount of progeny. But we have invasive apple snails in the Everglades. And the problem is that it reproduces on the stalks of the sawgrass,
Oh, yes.
like massively compared to
Oh,
our native.
the native snail.
That is very important for the snail cat.
Yes, the kite,
Because
which
the
is a type
size,
of.
ours is smaller, is
Mhm.
what the snail kite is
Yes.
adapted to
Yeah.
grab. But now because the other one
Bigger,
has
they can't get it.
exploded, they can't find the native one.
Exactly.
So that's a problem.
The snail kite is again endemic to the Everglades. The Everglades is a very unique and subtle, delicate ecosystem. Balance is very delicate, and the kite is a type of predator bird, like the falcon, the eagle, the hawk. It's a raptor. Thank you. And where's images? Oh, there. And the beak is actually bent to catch, to dig out. It has a particular curvature that is used for digging out that snail. And so it lives exclusively on the snail, right? If the snail disappears from the Everglades, then this kite will disappear too. There you go. Got a snail with it.
And it lives exclusively on which snail?
The native apple snail.
Native
From
apple snail?
Asia. Yeah, it's like this. Like, this size.
Let's take a look here. We're looking at the Everglades
But if, now,
apple snail.
but if a bird could eat the new,
The non-native.
the non-native, for some reason, it's beak or it's able to eat or can get to some of it, that survives.
That might happen in nature, because there's some sort of adaptiveness. But generally, the evolutionary time is
There's not
not
enough
there.
time, okay.
So snail kites have been for tens of thousands of years being selected and adapted to
So
that
that's
size of
the
snail
size, so it would be
and the
another time, okay.
locations. And all of a sudden, that gets replaced by the other one. And another thing that is happening is a flatworm. That
A
is
flatworm?
killing all our snails.
Oh, yes?
And not only the apples, but the
Wow.
live snails and the thalicus and other native that we have.
Yes?
You're literally finding the shells on the wild tamarind trees, on the hammocks.
Oh, yes?
And that is
Just empty.
throughout Florida. It came through the pet trade, one of these exotic plants.
Oh,
And it's a flat snail, a flat
a
worm.
flatworm,
Like the
huh?
planaria.
Like
The
planaria
plasma
or, yes.
But it kills everything. It vomits.
Who imports worms?
Uh-huh.
It
Yeah.
vomits, it's a digestive system
Oh,
on the
yes?
snail, and
Oh.
it kills it. It
Wow.
digests it completely and
External
continues.
digestion.
I've seen it. Like this.
Oh, yes?
Or
Wow.
flatworm.
And it's also an invasive.
Oh,
It's a-
this is probably
Oh, super.
arguably the
It
most invasive species
Where's
we
it
have
from?
right
Yes.
now
Right
Who
now.
knows, where does it
in
come from?
South Florida.
Oh, I mean, why do people buy it? What, were they feeding their snakes or
Yeah,
their,
They don't, is that we're importing everything from Asia.
From
It's
Asia.
part of,
sort of
wherever
like the cart that attached and it was on?
globalization.
Mm-hmm.
It came to eggs probably in one of these imported plants, pot plant.
Okay,
And once you have it in your yard, in your backyard, you start
It escapes.
reproducing and nothing eats it. because it has no predators over here.
No
That's how invasive
There's
species
at least
take
two
it.
of them.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily. If you have already a fertilized egg that comes and
In the soil.
Like lower organisms, you might have other forms of
Mm-hmm.
reproduction. And
Plus,
usually
planaria
it's
can
several.
split also. Planaria can split and reproduce by asexually. Yeah, the big problem in Florida in general, South Florida, is that we have this climate that is very benevolent. It's a nice subtropical climate, warm and humid and plenty of sunshine and water. But it's also a peninsula, which is relatively isolated by ocean. So its native population of plants and animals and fungi had developed over the eons into what it is today, but it's a delicate balance. Now, in the modern times, with airplanes and the pet industry and so forth, and even in agriculture, new species have been introduced that are much more aggressive. They don't have any native predators that eat them up. And so they're going wild. At some point, the iguanas are all over the place. We have them here.
And we have those buffalo toads.
Right, that's
Oh,
another
they're
one.
on my patio. I can't get rid of them, and I'm worried
Okay.
about my cats.
They eat the cat food.
Yeah.
They came in my house the other day.
Mhm.
When I had the back door open and
Right.
there was a huge buffalo toad eating the cat food.
Mhm. Yeah.
All
I
right.
had heard that there are about 100,000 boas in the Everglades. 100,000.
People that turn their pets loose.
Yeah.
We're not paying enough to kill them yet.
We have boas, we have pythons,
The python, yeah, the pythons,
we
yeah.
have monitor lizards, we have.
Monitor lizard?
Oh. we have
Monitor
the Nile-
lizard?
We have the Nile monitor.
Yes.
We don't have the Komodo dragon
Oh,
yet,
oh.
but we have the monitor lizard.
Wasn't
Yes.
the Colombian one, the one with curly tail lizard?
That's the agave, agama.
Agama?
I thought that was one that was
Lizard.
very deadly to the native lizards.
It's one of many, there's where the basilisk,
Mm-hmm.
we have
Basilisk.
several iguanas, spiny tail, and the green iguana, then the Mexican iguana. We have this monitor lizard. We
Yeah.
have two tegus, the black and white tegu, which is an Argentinian super aggressive lizard.
Oh, yes.
Like this, that
Yeah.
if you try to face it, it will go at you.
Oh, yes.
Try to
It will
bite.
attack.
Right.
Wow.
And we have the golden tegu.
Hmm.
And we have a type of chameleon that is very.
The Cuban chameleon, Anolis
No,
equestris?
No.
No, that's
No?
the Cuban Aranoli, the chipotle.
Yeah, that's
We
been
have
here
it
for
everywhere.
50
We eat
years,
the
60
eggs of
years.
birds and all that. And we have other Cuban lizards,
Mm-hmm.
Olisa gray.
Ah,
But we have a chameleon from Madagascar.
Oh, yes.
One of these
oh,
chameleons.
oh, large chameleon, yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
With the curly tail.
We have everything under the sky.
See, reptiles love it here. This is really a great place for reptiles, unfortunately, for the climate. But they are invading. And a big problem, big problem. Anyway, here's the fifth one is this issue of variations that are inheritable. I chose this particular example because it is so graphic. Lake Victoria and adjacent lakes here in Africa, equatorial Africa, all right, actually dried about 17,000 years ago. It dried. And it got refilled about 14,000 years ago. So since then, just in 14,000 years, which is very little in evolutionary time, a great variety of cichlids developed. Okay, they're all from this cichlid family, okay, of fish. But look at the great diversity. And the diversity has to do with a particular layer of the lake where they live and the niche. They have specialized. So they have become super specialized in the particular depth of the lake and the plants and algae that live in that area and what they feed on. They tend to be very territorial also, That's why when you have it in aquariums, you can basically just have cichlids because they go after everything else, very territorial. Like the blue jays are also, I see blue jays chasing around hawks here. They chase around the hawks because they're very territorial. But it's amazing how all this diversity happened in the past 14,000 years. It's incredible, no? Over 400 different species, all from common ancestry. And it's all been studied in detail, as you can see here with the branching effect, looking at just the morphology. So that's one example of these variations that become inheritable. And if they stay in typically, the easiest one is the geographical isolation, all right, can eventually develop into different species. And these are different species altogether. They're not just varieties. Okay, how do we know that they're species and not varieties? They don't interbreed. They don't interbreed. Simple as that. Okay. All right, so now let's look at the niche, because this niche is used a lot in population biology and evolutionary biology. So it's the role that an organism plays in nature. And it's also associated with the place or habitat. So niche and habitat, sometimes you see them interchangeable, right? And niches can be either continuous or discontinuous, depending mostly on the behavior of the animal. For example, this niche for the lion or lioness and the hyena that is here in the background and the vultures is kind of continuous because they have a whole prairie where they can roam, all right, wherever they find the food. So we don't know who took down the zebra. It could have been this lioness, but these other opportunistics are waiting around, and the hyena is waiting for the lioness to get her fill. And when she leaves, then the hyena will come in. And so with the vultures, but they have a more continuous range that they migrate from one area to another. This could be at a large scale or at a small localized scale, but it's still a continuous range, all right? What are these? These are called aphids, and the little insects that puncture holes into the plant, into little twigs, and suck out some of the phloem, the juices of the plant, and digest that. That's how they feed on. So you can see that this is one population of aphids here. There's another population of aphids on this other stalk, all right? We can talk about two different populations here within the same plant, but there's going to be some migration in and out from one population to another. This is a very localized area compared to the range of the prairie in Africa, but it's still a range. So typically it's according to the size of the animal, more or less, and its mobility. Okay? But these are examples of continuous ranges where there's a flow of individuals from one population to another. Or it could be discontinuous or contained, patchy, at a small scale or a large scale again. Here's an example of discontinuous at a small scale. These are lichens, and lichens are a combination of algae and fungi. It's mostly a fungus that got inserted or invaded by some algae and eventually became a symbiotic relationship because the fungus allows for a place, a habitat for the algae in which to live that is going to be humid inside. It's mostly water. And the algae, because it's photosynthesizing, is producing nourishment to the fungus. And so that combination got integrated nicely into what is called a lichen. And then what happens is that mostly on the fungus side, these lichens produce acids. And so they make for good pioneers in the sense that the acid will start eroding the rock long term. Remember, the turtle is slow, but the earth is patient, right? Okay, so there's an old saying, the turtle is slow, but the earth is patient. So the lichen over eons of time will digest this rock, it is smaller and smaller, and what it's producing is nutrients for other plants eventually to establish in the area. So lichens typically are good pioneers. Another example of discontinuous or patchy habitat at a large scale, at the continental scale, is simply the difference between the old world monkeys and the new world monkeys. They're all monkeys, okay? But the old world and the new world are separated by an entire ocean that we call the Atlantic Ocean. So those are examples of geographical barriers. Again, the niche could be small or large range, and it could be either continuous or discontinuous, just details about the niche and the habitat. But this is looking, these are terms that are used a lot in population biology and evolutionary biology. Another point that Darwin was making is this whole issue of selection being a process of elimination. It's elimination, okay? And typically, on average, is the weaker one. And you'll hear me say time and again, this issue of on average, which when I say that is I'm imploring a probabilistic model. And like Siobhan was saying, this is the eternal quandary between probability and determinism, right? That when we talk about populations and even the practice of medicine is a probabilistic art and a science, or a probabilistic observation at the level of population. But the people who make that population, the individuals who are making that population, who make up the population, and the individuals who are engaged in the practice of medicine, whether it's on the patient side or on the doctor side, they're actual real, live, determined human beings. We're not just statistics, okay? So each one of us could be on the 90% or on the 10%. We don't know until it actually happens. The probability is a past event by definition. So here we have a selective process going on. Actually, there are two selective processes going on here. One is more visible than the other because we have 3 bears for 1 fish. So only one bear is going to get the 1 fish, right? And on average, it will be the strongest bear and so forth. But you notice also that where it seems that this bear is the strongest bear, this bear is also more precarious because this bear is more on the edge. Whereas this bear is perhaps waiting for another fish to come his way a little further back on the waterfall. All right. So this guy, if he slips underneath, most likely he's had it. So selection can act both ways, all right? The other selection that is also there, but it's not as obvious, is that this could have been the strongest salmon that jumped up at that moment, but to his bad luck or to her bad luck, the bears were waiting for it. On another day or another hour, the bears may have been gone. So this leap could have been a leap to safety to higher ground. So this could have been the strongest salmon, all right, that got selected out by the chance that the bear was there at the right time. The right time for the bear, the wrong time for the fish. So you see where chance is integral, is built in. But there's also selection actively going on. So it's a very complex dynamic system. And when you expand this to the whole world, the selective process that is going on all the time. We can also talk about a 2-step process in selection. It's pre-zygotic or post-zygotic. Okay? This has meaning or importance precisely when we focus on reproduction as passing on the genes to the next generation. And sometimes population biologists and evolutionary biologists tend to be a little awkward because they only see the adult. How do they see the adult? They see the adult of any species, including the human, as just a bag of genes that has the potential to pass those genes on to the next generation. Okay? And so that's kind of simplifying a little bit, like a caricature. But really, when we see a chicken walking down the road, as I've seen them in Hialeah, that's just a bag of chicken genes that are getting ready to be passed on to the next generation of chickens. All right. So it's kind of an awkward way to see it, but evolutionarily speaking, it's about the passing of the genes and the variation that is embedded in those genes, right? At the allele level, at the genotype level. So from that perspective, we can talk about pre-zygotic selection or post-zygotic selection. All right, so the pre-zygotic selection is going to be at two levels. It's going to be at the level of the gametes themselves and at the level of the fertilization process. At the gametes, why? Well, because from, this is meiosis on an egg, on an ovum, from this follicle, from this precursor, all right, this oocyte, as the technical term would be, we're going to get 4 eggs. Mm-hmm. Now, this is only hypothetical for ova, because remember, meiosis is a double mitosis. Here's the first mitosis, and here's the second one. So here's the first one from 1, 2, and then from each one of those 2 more to an end total of 4. However, what is not shown in this diagram for the sake of simplicity is that after the first mitosis, here, at this first mitosis, this division is not equal. So that one of these 2 daughter cells will have more cytoplasm than the other one. They will have the same number of chromosomes and so forth, but at the level of the cytoplasm, one of these 2 cells, the first 2 daughter cells, will have more cytoplasm, and therefore the other one will have less. The one that has less cytoplasm is already on a track to being degenerate. At the second meiotic division, the same thing happens. Of the big one, its progeny is going to be also one bigger and the other one smaller. And of the smaller one, also the 2 were going to be smaller still. So the end result is that the one big one is a functional egg. And the other 3 smaller ones, they have too little cytoplasm to be functional, to get fertilized. They become what is known as polar bodies. Polar bodies, and they actually are stuck around, because it's not just the egg by itself. Functionally, the egg is surrounded by 2 layers, the corona radiata and the zona pellucida, and those other 3 polar bodies get kind of stuck in there, all right? But they're non-functional, they don't get fertilized. And that's a good thing, because we only need 1 egg to be fertilized by 1 sperm. So speaking of the sperm, if you thought that 4 from 1, 4 was abundant, think about the sperm. The sperm is actually millions. Functionally, for an ejaculate to be considered fertile, it has to have about 100 million sperm. Cut it down to 50 million. That's still an exotic, exuberant overabundance, because it only takes 1 of those sperm to fertilize. So there's tremendous selective process going on there. By the time the 1 sperm is the one that fertilizes, that's the 1 sperm that passed on its genes. So there's selective pressure in this whole formation of the gametes, and there's also selective pressure at the moment of fertilization itself. Because that is before the zygote, that is just called pre-zygotic. Okay? So it's at the level of meiosis or gametogenesis in whole, and at the level of fertilization. Tremendous selective pressure going on there, but it's all microscopic, so we don't really see it. And we experience it only after the fact, meaning each one of us individually, out of the potentially hundreds or millions of siblings that could have been not us, but it turned out to be us, all right? So pre-zygotic selection is intense, absolutely intense. We never see it because it's microscopic, but it's happening. Once the zygote finally comes to be through fertilization of whatever species, including plants, okay? Then comes post-zygotic selection, because a zygote is not sufficient to have an next generation. because the zygote by himself or herself cannot reproduce. That zygote needs to reach adulthood, again, in whatever species. That may take a few hours, a few years, a few months, a few years, 24 years, at least 12 years, if not more for us, for the human, okay? So imagine all of the selection that occurs, just natural, not sexual, but natural selection on that individual, on each one of us when we were born to the point that we made it to adulthood, right? To reproductive adulthood. Then, in addition, comes the sexual selection, which I haven't talked about yet, and we're going to get into that one. But eventually, for that couple to meet, for that individual woman to meet this individual man, hopefully they're both fertile enough to have at least one baby, necessary but still not sufficient, because we now need to wait at least 12 years, if not more, 24, maybe 36, to see if this baby is actually fertile or not. Okay, and then if he or she is fertile, then we can say that these individuals have survived the post-zygotic selection process. All right, but we can see, we can intuit that many others have not survived for X number of reasons. Even if they made it healthily to reproductive maturity, they never actually found a mate, or they may not have been interested in a mate, or they became a priest or a nun, etc. You know, they just, for a number of reasons, never made it. Mm-hmm. If they do produce, reproduce, procreate, eventually we may get the third generation, right? So that's what I try to show here, 3 generations of humans, which would be finally the proof of principle. Okay. So the middle generation here is what is proving that the grandparent generation was indeed fertile, because they produced fertile offspring who themselves were able to procreate. And even so, we can question, because the assumption is that this mom and this dad did not come from the same grandparents, otherwise they would be brother and sister, right? So they're from 2 different generations. So that's another layer of complication there. Anyway, what this is proving just simply is that there is a pre-zygotic selection that is going on that is intense, but it's so microscopic. And then there's a post-zygotic selection. So it's necessary to be fertilized and to be born, but not sufficient, because that individual also needs to reach reproductive success sometime later in life. And that typically is macroscopic, but it also happens in the microscopic world with a number of species. Okay? All right. Let's talk a little bit about the competitive exclusion principle, which is important for niche and habitat, for localization, which again may lead to speciation eventually, may lead. This is the idea that no two species can coexist in the same niche or habitat, all right? Can inhabit the same niche. So here's represented very simply. We have a flock of yellow birds. That's one species. Don't miss the little black bugs that they eat. The black bugs inhabit the ground, the trunk, and the canopy of the tree. So the black bugs essentially inhabit 3 areas, let's say non-discriminately. They find whatever they're eating in all 3 areas, the canopy, the branches and trunk, and even on the ground, okay? But the yellow birds feed on the black bugs. So when the yellow birds arrive, the yellow birds could be on the canopy, on the trunk, or on the ground, because they find plenty of their food, the resources. But these resources are limited. Now come some red birds. And the red birds also feed on the same bug. There's a competition, all right? The red birds also feed on the same bug, and therefore the competition. Eventually, either the yellow birds displace the red birds, or the red birds displace the yellow birds, but they cannot stay for long feeding indiscriminately on the same source. So over time, they have to work it out whereby whichever population is more adapted, okay, by a number of characteristics that they have, either morphological or physiological or behavioral characteristics. In this diagram, the yellow birds prefer the canopy. That's where they're going to go. Whereas the red birds do better on the trunk. That's where they're going to go. It could have been the other way around. What we don't know from this diagram, but we can infer, is that the red birds were better adapted for trunk than for canopy, and vice versa. The yellow birds were better adapted for canopy than for trunk. I can give you one example. Let's say that these red birds had kind of long tails that tend to get entangled into the twigs and the branches of the tree. They would prefer an area that is more free of twigs. Whereas the yellow birds, maybe they have short tails and don't get as entangled, and they can jump from twig to twig inside. Maybe they have keener sight, I don't know, but it will come down to the specific characteristics of each species of the yellow bird and red bird to see which is more adapted to which. We would assume that the yellow birds are better adapted for canopy, and that the red birds are better adapted for trunks and branches, free branches, in this particular scheme, all right? And then once that happens, then there's stability. As long as the black bugs are around still in the canopy and the trunk, those two population of birds, those two species of birds have settled into their niche. So that's called the competitive exclusion principle. And it happens in all of the kingdoms and domains that we have seen: animals, plants, fungi, the protists, bacteria, and archaea, right? It really does happen in all the domains and kingdoms that we've talked about.
Would that be sort of a concept of like regression to the mean, that eventually?
I guess mathematically speaking, you could model it that way, but you have several regressions going on. You know, it's a complex graph because you would have several trends going on at the same time. You would have at least 3 trends. You would have a trend for yellow birds, a trend for red birds, and a trend for the black bugs.
And I guess maybe it's not so much regression, it's more like equilibrium, that nature establishes.
Equilibrium.
Yeah, homeostasis, there's a balance that's eventually achieved.
Another way of seeing equilibrium, so each one of those 3, there would be a carrying capacity for the yellow bird, for the red bird, and for the black bug. So each one of these would, would have a carrying capacity depending on the resources available. Also keep in mind that this is kind of simplistic because it's only focusing on the black bug as the source of nourishment for the birds. It's not talking about an alternate food source, for example, berries. If the black bugs become scarce, maybe the yellow birds can eat berries, but the red birds cannot eat berries, okay? So this is a simplistic diagram just to show the competitive exclusion principle. But in reality, in nature, on the other side of this wall, it's much more complicated than this. It's a very dynamic system that is going on. But it does apply across the board for every domain, every kingdom that we know of. All right, so, but what's the point? What's the evolutionary point of this? Let's not miss it, you know. The evolutionary point of this is that originally, the yellow birds who got to the tree first had the whole tree. But now, after the red birds came in, now the yellow birds are restricted to the canopy. But also the red birds are restricted to the trunk. So this is localized in the population. In fact, another thing that I forgot to mention that I'm just noticing now, what happened to the yellow bird population? So how many populations of yellow birds do we have in number 1? How many populations do we have? We have 1 population. And there's a dynamic flow, right? Because they can find black bugs, canopy, trunk, and ground. But let's not forget the ground guys. After selective pressure comes in, namely the red birds, how many yellow populations do we have in 3? We have 2 populations. We have 2 populations, okay? Now, fast forward this over a relatively long period of time, there may be a time that because of variation, and some variation may be more adapted to canopy living, whereas variation for ground living, one can imagine that different skills of different sets of skills, even behavior, which may become morphological at some point, develop for the ground yellowbird or for the canopy yellowbird. At some point, these 2 populations may become distinct enough that they don't recognize each other. Even if to our eye they look alike, they will not interbreed. All right, so that's the beginning of a potential speciation. Even if they look alike to us, to our simple naked eye, they themselves do not recognize each other as the same species. They will not interbreed. Well, if they no longer interbreed, the ground yellow and the canopy yellow, that could lead to the beginning of speciation if they continue to select on the specific skills or qualities that are needed to live either on canopy or on the ground. Which one can intuit are different sets of skills, right? Different terrain. Okay, so that's the whole point here, that because of the selective pressure that came in at this point, basically the red birds, it split the yellow population into 2. All right. Which also makes me think of the point that selective pressure can either be biotic or abiotic. In this case, the selective pressure was a biotic pressure, was another species coming into the territory. It could have been an abiotic, for example, in the ocean, where there is a temperature differential between top and bottom. That's a temperature thing, it's abiotic. It's non-biotic, but it's still a selective pressure, okay? Okay, a few more. Still on natural selection. We can ask the question, what does selection act upon? And first, it acts at the level of the individual and the individual phenotype, because the phenotype is actually the set of characteristics that allows this individual to exist and to survive and to thrive at this particular time, in this particular nature habitat, okay? So again, this is universal in the sense that it is first the genotype that is feeling the selective pressure, if you will. Whether it's a proteus, fungi, plants, or animals, and here are some examples. Let's say the foot, which functionally, what is a foot functionally? A means of locomotion. It's a means of moving around, which typically we associate with animals, okay? It turns out that the foot has evolved in nature many times in many different styles and ways. For example, for clams and bivalves are mollusks that have 2 shells, all right? There is a single muscular foot that moves the creature around, and it helps either for moving on the sand or actually digging in and burrowing into the sand. All right, there's a single muscular foot. Think of food, sorry, that was subconscious. Contrasted to an echinoderm. Echinoderm is, for example, a starfish. It also happens with the sea urchins and the sea cucumbers, all right? They have 2 feet. 2 feet, as you can see, are very different from the muscular foot of the mollusk, of the clam. And in fact, these 2 feet are kind of hollow inside, and they're filled with seawater, and it's called a water vascular system for the whole organism, for the whole starfish. But you can see them here very plainly that they are many dozen, probably hundreds of feet that the starfish has. The individual starfish hundreds of feet compared to a single foot on the clam, all right? And very different shape. This doesn't do any digging. It actually has little suckers at the tip, as can be seen here, and it's very much for locomotion. Further, the eye also, since I'm at it, the eye has also evolved many, many different times in evolution, and the starfish also have little eyelets on the tip of their arms, which are just sensitive to light or dark. So they can tell whether there's more light or less light, and they move accordingly, whether they're looking for light or darkness. Okay? So that kind of guides the feet to go in a particular direction. And all the way to articulated feet, for example, in insects, which also have what we call an exoskeleton, an armor around them. And to grow, they have to shed that skeleton periodically because they're kind of trapped into that armor at every stage of development. But you can see that this praying mantis is definitely articulated, right? Many sections that make up the legs of the mantis, and in fact, specialized functions, so that not all the 6 legs have the same function, or the 3 pairs of legs, because there's bilateral symmetry. The latter 4 legs on the backside of the animal are used for locomotion and walking, but the front legs are actually used for hunting. And they're formidable hunters, and they trap prey, okay? And here you can see even the adaptation of the little claws and pins, whatever it is that they have, the little spikes to trap other insects, and they're very voracious. So very different legs of insects compared to starfish, compared to clams, and so on and so forth. We can make the argument even for us. We have a very sophisticated evolution of locomotion, whereas from the 4 legs as tetrapods, only 2 of the 4 legs of the pods work for actual locomotion. And by becoming erect, by becoming upright, it freed up the forward legs into developing for grasping and handling things and using them as tools, actually, so that it synergized with the brain to develop very dexterous hands and no legs at all. So people normally today don't walk on their hands. You know, some people do that, but the vast majority of people naturally, we walk on our legs and not on our hands. So that's another example of adaptation. So selection will act first on the genotype of the individual organism, whatever that, what that organism is. And secondarily, will act on other aspects of the individual. It could be at the level of gametes. For example, the most potent sperm on average is the one that's going to fertilize. Unless it went up the wrong fallopian tube, it could be the strongest sperm, but went up the wrong fallopian tube. So that's 50%. That happens because sperm come from men and we never asked direction, right? So we went up the wrong fallopian tube. It was the strongest sperm, but they never got to fertilize because there was no egg there. All right, so group selection also, secondarily, an entire group can be selected. You know, if a whole pod of bacteria get hit with antibiotics, then that whole cluster of bacteria are going to be wiped out. On average, that's the hope, right? That's the hope of antibiotics. Kin selection, when siblings select against each other, and that's competition among siblings. And that happens a lot also. Interspecies, again, by definition, interspecies is when different species compete for the same resources, as in the case of the red and the yellow birds. The species may be related or not. They can be closely related, distantly related, or almost unrelated, as for example, the vultures and the lioness for a carcass. They're related, well, they're related at the vertebrate level, but the bacteria that will eventually eat that carcass at the very end, and finish the job, and the lion are even more distantly related. Or it could be the hyena and the lion that are related at the level of mammal, much closely related. You can figure the cladogram, the phylogenetic tree. Okay, but this is secondarily, and typically it will take a more drastic or catastrophic event for this type of selection to kick in. Whereas the primary selection is more run-of-the-mill on a daily basis, typically. The phenotype of the individual. Okay, a couple more questions here to ask. One is, why is evolution so slow then? If selection is such a pressure that is acting on every minute of every day of every year, why don't we see more faster speciation happening? All right. Well, because again, that element of chance slows it down a lot. First, we have to wait for the chance mutation to happen. Then we have to wait for that chance mutation to actually express. Keep in mind, if most of the genome is non-coding, on average, a mutation is going to happen where? In a non-coding region, which has no effect. So that's why most mutations really have no effect. All right. A few are damaging if they happen in coding region, and a few of those are actually beneficial if it actually makes that coding region better, makes for a better protein as opposed to a worse protein. Okay. So really, that automatically slows the process tremendously. Just that element of chance, because precisely it's non-directional. In contrast to artificial selection, that we're actually selecting on a particular characteristic or any number of them, consciously. Okay.
Is there a different rate of repair of the DNA damage,
right,
on the coding regions than on the rest of the DNA, or is it just a random?
No, I think not, because right, it's a generalized repair mechanism, and it just substitutes the wrong base, right? As it's called proofreading, as you know, it's proofreading. So what Luis is referring to is that a DNA replication, that duplication of the DNA before the cell splits, right? Whether it's either mitosis or meiosis, the cell has to split, right? Before it splits, it has to duplicate its DNA so that the daughter cells end up with the same number, same amount. In that replication machinery, the replication process is so dangerous because the DNA is kind of exposed, even in that tiny region, it's exposed and it could get mutated. It's so dangerous that it's done extremely fast. Replication is a very fast machinery. Of course, the compromise is that there are going to be errors. Mismatch of bases is going to introduce one purine for another or one pyridine for another, all right? So the replication machinery on the first read of replication introduces errors in the duplicates because it was done very fast. It's like you have a masterpiece of a painting, but we know they're coming to steal it at 9 o'clock tonight, so we have to reproduce it fast. Well, the reproduction is going to have some errors on it, but at least let's get it reproduced first, all right? Then secondarily, there will come another machinery on top of the replicated DNA, of the duplicates, that will correct the errors, okay? And they will correct it. And that machinery will correct, let's say 99% of the errors, but not every error. So some errors slip through still in every replication. But that proofreading machinery is really non-discriminate. It's generalized for the entire, because the machinery doesn't really know what the coding region is or not. That's only at the level of translation. Yeah, if you think about it, we only know what codes and doesn't code when we get to translation, when it's expressed, you know. All right. So also, why is it so slow? Well, because the assumption is that every species that is outside of this wall and for the rest of the earth is living today and is reproducing and is having a replacement level and it's kind of at the carrying capacity. And so it's the most adapted. So why change? If it works, don't change it, right? When there is a stressor, when there's typically a climatological change, and that's why the big worry now with this climate change is that is going to trigger the potential for change or the actual change, okay? And that is going to stress on the weaker and so forth. So the selecting out will happen, and the selecting out can be on entire species on the secondary selection. And so that's the danger, is that environmental change for the worse, in other words, making the environment worse, more toxic, all right, warmer or more. You saw the picture the other day of everybody in Mumbai and in Delhi, millions of people have to carry masks because the air has actually become toxic, all right? Then the weaker is going to be more affected. When we take that at the level of the biodiversity, we can also talk about weaker species as a whole. For example, what's your intuition of whole classes of animals that are more delicate? Of the vertebrates, of the 5 vertebrates: fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, mammals. The amphibians. Precisely because they're amphibian, they need a very humid environment, they need a quiet environment, they need to lay their eggs in water, and then those individuals need to grow into land and go back to water to place their eggs and so forth. So the amphibians are disappearing through the. When was the last time you saw an amphibian, except for the buffalo, toad?
We had a queue of frogs.
Oh, the queue of frogs, we have them? Yeah.
We have them.
Also?
Las Bananeras.
Ah, yes? Oh boy.
He came in the raft as well.
Also.
And,
oh boy, another one.
If you grow very big, it's actually eating up our little frogs.
Other frogs, the native frogs.
The native frogs are smaller.
Oh,
They don't grow that big. The Cuban frogs are eating them, and they're kind of toxic.
Yeah?
A little bit.
Oh yeah, the native. The Cuban.
The Cuban.
Really?
Not poisonous like the buffalo,
Okay.
but they're toxic,
Somewhat,
so
yeah.
kind of the snakes don't eat them.
Okay, so they have a selective advantage in that the predators, they're not really the ideal prey. There you go. Yeah. I think what's going to become is we're going to become ecologically, we're just going to become another Southeast Asia, another tropical Africa, another tropical Latin America, because everything else is coming in. And it's going to tropicalize this region into an exuberance. And who knows what's going to survive out there in the long term. But I think it's getting to the level of impossible to control these things.
Well, then, is it possible, instead of us becoming Southeast Asia, that we become nothing?
No, we're gonna get an equilibrium. What you just said is very true.
Give it time.
When the continents joined at the Istmo,
Yeah,
in
in Panama. Mm-hmm.
there was a clash. All the species from North America,
Huge.
all the species in plants, animals, fungi from South America. And
And
right
started
there,
interacting.
At a moment,
Yep.
we had an apocalypse
Mm-hmm.
in a way.
Catastrophic
All these
event.
species competing. All of a sudden, there was a migration from
Mhm.
the south.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the survival of the fittest. The same over here. We've been isolated geographically
Mm-hmm.
by the land masses and the ocean, but not anymore. Even though artificially we brought these species with our behavior, but it's very similar than if land starts touching and species starts to interact.
Exactly.
What's happening.
So just to put it in context, when Luis says in a moment, geologic time, we're talking about a few years, a few decades. But this migration, and again, it depends on how mobile the species was, right? Some move faster than others. Typically the larger cats, for example, went north and south and so forth. Others went slower, but eventually, yes, there was an intermingling there, and it was really a traumatic event for both for North America biota and for South America biota when that happened. Eventually, over the eons, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of years or millions of years, it reached an equilibrium to the wildlife that we have today, either north or south. Okay, but that was really, at that time, was a catastrophic event. The same will happen in South Florida, I believe. At some point, it will reach some equilibrium. I think it's going to be way beyond our time. And eventually it could be that some of these exotic species start competing with each other. So whereas they will not have native species to compete with, the native population will be replaced. And so we'll lose the native population of plants or animals. Let's see who gets to survive. But it can be replaced into an intermingling, which is kind of interesting if you think about it, because we would have a mixture of South American, African, and Asian species, both plants and animals, all living in one fairly localized region, which is what we call South Florida. And the Everglades will never be the same. Mm-hmm. All right, actually, I run out of time, sadly, sorry. So what's left is sexual selection. It's about 4 or 5 slides. I'm not gonna go into it, I'm gonna stop here. We'll pick it up at the start of next class, all right? But we are meeting next Saturday. So just do your summary up until here and hold on the sexual selection to be summarized next week, all right? Some of you are still missing some summaries, so please make sure you send that in from the videos on the 4 forces and the 4 forces that drive evolution and variation, all right? So please, if you're missing that summary, send it in as soon as you can, all right?
What was it again?
2 summaries, right?
So,
Not only 2, or one more.
right, no, that's it. It was variation and the forces together, the 4 forces. That was a single summary, all right? I had split it up into 5A and 5B.
Yeah.
I had two handouts, sorry about that, but it's just because they're kind of separate topics. And as for this one, up until the end of natural selection here, I think it's slide number 15. So don't summarize sex selection yet. Mm-hmm. All right, thanks again. And for your patience and your participation, God willing, we'll meet next Saturday. Just stay alert. Hopefully this construction will be over, and then we'll try to start at 9:15 again, all right?
Now we know.
And even if it's not over, now you know the way around. So just come a few minutes earlier in case you still have to do the runaround. All right? Okay, thanks again. Let me shut this down. Stop recording.